The harsh wind rattled the windows of Hannah Ainsley's homestead as lightning cracked across the Montana sky, illuminating her weathered face as she peered through the darkness toward the distant sound that had drawn her from sleep. It wasn't the thunder that had awakened her, but something more desperate, a high, ready wail carried on the wind, a sound no decent soul could ignore on this stormy April night in 1878. Hannah wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and lifted the lantern from its hook, her heart hammering against her ribs. At 32, she had lived alone for nearly 3 years since her father passed, maintaining their small ranch just outside Silver Creek with nothing but determination and 2 calloused hands. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, Jack Whittaker, a man whose path rarely crossed hers except at Sunday services or the occasional town gathering. The crying grew louder as Hannah stepped onto her porch, the rain spattering against her face. There was no mistaking it now. It was a baby's cry, desperate and frightened. Hannah lifted her skirts and hurried across the muddy yard toward the sound, her lantern light bobbing through the darkness. The crying led her to the edge of her property where an old shed stood. The door hung open, swinging violently in the wind. Hannah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside, raising her lantern high to illuminate the dark corners. There, nestled in a rough-hewn cradle, lay a baby wrapped in a damp blanket, its tiny face red from crying. Hannah rushed forward, setting the lantern on a barrel, and lifted the infant. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, a baby boy with a shock of dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Oh, you poor little thing," Hannah murmured, tucking the baby against her chest. "Where's your mama? Where's your papa?" A noise behind her made Hannah whirl around, clutching the baby protectively. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, dripping rain onto the wooden floor. "He needs a soft voice and steady hands," Hannah said instinctively, her arms tightening around the whimpering infant. The figure stepped forward into the circle of lantern light, revealing the face of Jack Whittaker, his usually composed features twisted with worry and exhaustion. His clothes were soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, those piercing blue eyes Hannah had always avoided at church socials, were rimmed with red. "Miss Ainsley," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't know where else to go." Hannah looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at Jack. "This is your child," Jack nodded, removing his sodden hat. "My son. His name is Thomas, his mother." He swallowed hard. "My wife passed during the birth 2 months ago. I've been trying, but tonight," his voice broke. "He won't stop crying. Hasn't for hours. I thought maybe." "You thought I might know what to do?" Hannah asked, surprised. They had exchanged no more than polite greetings in the 3 years she'd been running her father's ranch. Jack's shoulders slumped. "Everyone in town speaks of your kindness. I didn't know where else to turn." Hannah looked down at little Thomas, who had quieted somewhat in her arms, though his breath still came in hiccuping sobs. She knew what it was to be alone, to face each day without someone to share the burden. But she had chosen this life after refusing 3 marriage proposals from men who wanted her land more than her heart. Jack Whittaker had lost his choice, and now this tiny boy had lost his mother. "You're both soaked through," Hannah said firmly. "Come to my house. I've got a fire going and some milk that can be warmed." Relief washed over Jack's face. "I don't want to impose nonsense," Hannah cut him off, already moving toward the door. "This little one needs to be dry and warm, and from the looks of it, so do you." The walk back to Hannah's cabin seemed longer with Jack following behind, his boots squelching in the mud. The baby had settled against her chest, his cries reduced to occasional whimpers, as if he sensed he was finally in capable hands. Inside, Hannah directed Jack to sit by the fire while she quickly gathered what she needed. A clean blanket, warm water, and some of the goat's milk she kept in her root cellar. As she worked, warming the milk and testing it on her wrist, she could feel Jack watching her. "You have a way with him," Jack said softly. "He's been crying since sundown." Hannah unwrapped the damp blanket from Thomas and gently cleaned him with the warm water. Babies can sense when we're upset, they feel our worry. She glanced up at Jack. When was the last time you slept, Mr. Whitaker? Jack ran a hand over his face. Properly. Not since Alina died. Hannah's heart squeezed at the raw grief in his voice. She remembered Jack's wife vaguely, a pretty, fine-boned woman from back east who had come to Montana as a schoolteacher. They had married quickly, causing quite a stir in Silver Creek's gossip circles. You should rest, Hannah said, rewrapping Thomas in the dry blanket. Take my bed for tonight, I'll sit with the little one. I couldn't, you can and you will, Hannah said firmly. A father who can't stand on his feet is no good to his son. Something flickered in Jack's tired eyes, gratitude, perhaps, or simply the relief of having someone else take charge, even momentarily. He nodded and allowed Hannah to show him to her small bedroom. Once Jack had collapsed onto her bed, not even bothering to remove his boots, Hannah returned to the main room and settled into her rocking chair by the fire, cradling Thomas against her. The baby's eyes, so like his father's, gazed up at her with solemn curiosity. Well, little man, Hannah whispered, offering him the warmed milk in a spoon, seems like it's just you and me tonight. As the storm raged outside, Hannah rocked and sang softly, old lullabies her mother had sung to her before consumption had taken her when Hannah was just 12. Thomas finally drifted to sleep, his tiny hand curled around her finger. Hannah studied his peaceful face, a strange ache blooming in her chest. She had resigned herself to spinsterhood, to tending her land and livestock without a family of her own. But holding this small life against her heart stirred something she had long buried, a longing for children, for a family that was more than just memories and solitude. The rain had stopped by the time dawn broke across the eastern sky. Hannah had dozed in the chair, Thomas still secure in her arms. She woke to the sound of Jack moving about in her kitchen, the soft clink of a coffee pot being set on the stove. I hope you don't mind, he said when he noticed her eyes open. Thought you might appreciate some coffee after your night's watch. Hannah carefully shifted Thomas, who remained blessedly asleep. That's kind of you. Jack came to stand before her, looking down at his son with an expression that mingled love and fear in equal measure. In the clear morning light, Hannah could see him properly for the first time. Jack Whitaker was younger than she had thought, perhaps 34 or 35, with a strong jawline partially hidden beneath several days' stubble. His clothes, now dried from the fire, were worn but clean, the clothes of a working man rather than one of the dandies who sometimes pass through Silver Creek. I don't know how to thank you, Miss Ainsley, Jack said quietly. Hannah, she corrected him, and there's no need for thanks. Any decent person would have helped. Not everyone would have opened their home to a desperate man in the middle of a storm, Jack countered. I'm in your debt. Hannah rose carefully, handing Thomas to his father. Jack took the baby with surprising gentleness, though his hands trembled slightly. I need to tend to my animals, Hannah said. You're welcome to stay for breakfast. Jack nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. I'd be grateful, and perhaps you might show me how you got him to sleep so peacefully. Hannah paused at the door. It's not magic, Mr. Whitaker. Just patience and a steady hand. She hesitated, then added, and the knowledge that you're not alone anymore. The words hung in the air between them, meaning more than she had intended. Hannah quickly stepped outside, her cheeks warming despite the cool morning air. As she moved through her morning chores, feeding the chickens, milking her goat, checking on her small herd of cattle, Hannah couldn't help but think about Jack and Thomas. What would happen to them now? Jack's ranch was larger than hers, with more cattle and better grazing land, but a ranch was no place for a man alone with an infant son. By the time Hannah returned to the house, Jack had managed to prepare a simple breakfast of coffee and flapjacks, though she noticed he'd had to juggle cooking while holding Thomas. This looks wonderful, Hannah said, washing her hands in the basin by the door. It's the least I could do, Jack replied, setting a plate before her. Though I warn you, my cooking skills are limited. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the clink of forks against plates and Thomas's occasional coos. Finally, Jack set down his fork. "I need to ask a tremendous favor," he began, his voice hesitant. "I've tried hiring women from town to help with Thomas, but none stay more than a week. The isolation, the hours." He sighed heavily. "I was wondering if you might consider coming to my ranch, just for a short while, to help me learn how to care for him properly." Hannah stared at him, caught off guard by the request. "Mr. Whitaker, Jack, please." "Jack," she amended, "I have my own ranch to run." "I understand that," he said quickly. "And I would compensate you, of course, but last night was the first time Thomas has slept peacefully since Alina." He trailed off, looking down at his son. "I'm at my wit's end, Miss Ains, Hannah. I don't know what to do." Hannah studied the man across from her. There was no artifice in his plea, no hidden agenda she could detect, just a desperate father trying to do right by his motherless child. 2 weeks, she heard herself say. "I can give you 2 weeks to help you establish a routine for Thomas. But I'll need to check on my place every few days." Relief washed over Jack's face. "That's more than fair. I can have one of my ranch hands look after your livestock while you're away." Hannah nodded, already mentally cataloging what she would need to bring, what instructions she would need to leave. "I'll pack a few things after breakfast." Jack's ranch was indeed larger than Hannah's modest homestead, with a main house that was nearly twice the size of her cabin. It sat nestled in a valley with Cottonwood Creek running along its eastern boundary, providing year-round water for the cattle that dotted the hillsides. Jack's foreman, an older man named Pete Miller, greeted them as they rode in. Hannah perched somewhat awkwardly on her mare with Thomas secured against her chest in a sling she had fashioned from a shawl. "Thank the Lord," Pete said when Jack explained Hannah's presence. "That little one's cries have been breaking all our hearts." Hannah soon discovered why Jack had been so desperate. The house, while well built, was in complete disarray. Dishes were piled in the sink, laundry overflowed from baskets, and there was a general air of masculine neglect that spoke of a household without a woman's touch. Alina was only here for 7 months before. Jack gestured vaguely, not completing the sentence. "We hadn't fully settled in." Hannah nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. The house still bore the tentative touches of a new bride who hadn't lived long enough to make it truly hers. There were pretty curtains at the windows but bare walls, a china cabinet with dishes nearly arranged but floors that needed a good scrubbing. "First things first," Hannah said decisively. "Thomas needs a proper schedule: feeding, sleeping, bathing. And you need a system for keeping house while caring for him." The next few days fell into a rhythm as Hannah showed Jack how to bathe Thomas, how to tell if he was hungry or merely tired, how to hold him so he felt secure. Jack proved to be an attentive student, his large hands becoming surprisingly deft at changing swaddling cloths and preparing milk. "You're a natural," Hannah commented one evening as she watched Jack gently rock Thomas to sleep by the fire. Jack looked up, surprise evident on his face. "I never thought I'd be doing this alone," he admitted. "Alina and I talked about having a large family. She wanted at least 4 children, his voice caught. "Now I'm terrified I'll fail this one." Hannah moved to sit beside him on the settee. "You won't fail him. You love him, that's evident in everything you do." "Love isn't always enough," Jack said softly. "He needs a mother." Hannah felt her cheeks warm and looked away quickly. "He has you and you're learning quickly." Jack was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his sleeping son. "Did you ever want children of your own, Hannah?" The question caught her off guard, stirring emotions she usually kept carefully contained. "I suppose I did once, but life had other plans." "You never married?" Hannah shook her head. "There were offers, but none from men I could imagine spending my life with. After my father died, it seemed easier to just continue on my own." "It gets lonely," Jack said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes," Hannah admitted. "Sometimes." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something shifted in the atmosphere, a recognition, perhaps, of shared solitude, of parallel paths that had unexpectedly converged. The moment was broken when Thomas stirred and whimpered, and Jack returned his attention to his son. But later that night, as Hannah lay in the guest bedroom staring at the ceiling, she found herself thinking of Jack's question and of the look in his eyes when he'd asked it. The days slipped by more quickly than Hannah had anticipated. She found herself falling into the rhythms of Jack's household, rising early to prepare breakfast before Thomas woke, then moving through the day in a dance of infant care and homemaking that felt surprisingly natural. Jack had taken to bringing Thomas out to the barn in the mornings, safely nestled in a basket while he tended to the immediate needs of the ranch. Hannah would often find them there, Jack pointing out the horses and cattle to his son, his deep voice narrating the work being done as if Thomas could understand every word. One morning, Hannah paused in the barn doorway, a fresh cup of coffee in hand intended for Jack, and watched as he knelt beside Thomas's basket, his expression tender as he spoke to his son. "One day, all this will be yours," he was saying. "Your grandfather built this ranch from nothing, and your mother chose to make her life here with me, short as it was. You come from strong stock, Thomas Whitaker." Something in his voice, the gentle pride, the underlying sorrow, made Hannah's throat tighten. She cleared it softly, and Jack looked up, a smile spreading across his face when he saw her. "I brought you coffee," she said, stepping forward. "You spoil me," Jack replied, taking the cup. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a brief touch that nonetheless sent a flutter through Hannah's chest. "How is he this morning?" she asked, kneeling beside Thomas's basket. "Contemplative," Jack said with a chuckle. "I think he's considering the complexities of cattle breeding." Hannah laughed, reaching out to stroke Thomas's cheek. The baby turned toward her touch, his tiny mouth forming an O of surprise before breaking into a toothless smile. Hannah's heart melted at the sight. "His first real smile," Jack said softly, "and it's for you." Hannah glanced up, caught by the warmth in Jack's gaze. "Babies his age smile at anything that interests them?" "I think it's more than that," Jack said. "He knows who's been caring for him, who's made him feel safe." He hesitated, then added, "As do I." Hannah felt her cheeks flush and busied herself adjusting Thomas's blanket. "I should get back to the house. I'm making a stew for dinner." Jack nodded, but as Hannah rose to leave, he caught her hand. "Hannah," he said, his voice low, "thank you for everything." Hannah felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip tempered by gentleness. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, after Thomas had been fed and put down for the night, Hannah and Jack sat on the porch, watching as the sunset painted the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink. A comfortable silence had settled between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of Jack's rocking chair. "I've been thinking," Jack said finally, "about what happens when your 2 weeks are up." Hannah's hands stilled in her lap. She had been thinking about the same thing, with increasing frequency and growing discomfort. The thought of returning to her solitary existence, leaving Jack and Thomas to fend for themselves, sat like a stone in her stomach. "I've shown you most of what I know about caring for a baby," she said carefully. "You're managing well now, that's not." Jack shook his head. "That's not what I meant." Hannah looked at him questioningly. Jack leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze direct. "I've been alone since Alina died, not just alone in raising Thomas, but alone." He gestured vaguely at the space around him. "This house needs a woman's touch, Thomas needs a mother, and he swallowed visibly. "I find myself needing you, Hannah Ainsley." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Jack, I'm not proposing marriage," Jack clarified quickly. "Not yet, that would be too soon, too presumptuous, but I'm asking if you might consider staying longer, not as a hired helper but as—" He searched for the right words. "As someone who might, in time, consider becoming part of this family." Hannah stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," Jack said simply. "I know you're kind and capable. I know Thomas lights up when you enter a room." I know the house feels more like a home when you're in it." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I know that when you smile, I feel something I never thought I'd feel again after Alina died." Hannah stood abruptly, moving to the porch railing, her back to Jack as she struggled to compose herself. This was not at all what she had expected when she agreed to help a desperate father and his crying baby. "My ranch," she said finally. "I can't just abandon it." Jack rose and came to stand beside her, careful not to crowd her. "I've been thinking about that too. Your land borders mine to the east. What if we combined our operations? Your cattle could graze with mine and we could work both properties together." Hannah turned to look at him, startled by the practicality of his suggestion. "You've given this a lot of thought." "I've had little else to think about these past 2 weeks," Jack admitted. "Watching you with Thomas, seeing how naturally you fit here, it's made me realize what we've been missing." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I need time, Jack. It's unexpected." Jack nodded, his expression softening. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Thomas." That night, Hannah lay awake long into the dark hours, her mind turning over Jack's words. She had come to Silver Creek after her mother's death, accompanying her father, who had sought a fresh start away from the memories in Missouri. She had grown up on the ranch, learning every aspect of cattle raising alongside her father, who had never once suggested that such work wasn't suitable for a girl. When the marriage proposals had come first from the banker's son who had eyed her land hungrily, then from the widowed shopkeeper who needed someone to raise his 4 children, and finally from the cattle baron's nephew who had seen her as a means to expand his uncle's holdings, Hannah had found it easy to refuse. None of them had wanted her for herself, for the woman she was beneath the capable exterior. But Jack was different. He had seen her at her most natural, hair loosened from its usual bun, sleeves rolled up as she bathed his son, hands red from scrubbing floors and cooking meals. He had watched her work and had valued what he saw. And there was Thomas, sweet Thomas with his father's blue eyes and his mother's delicate features. In just 2 weeks, Hannah had grown to love the baby with a fierceness that surprised her. The thought of leaving him made her chest ache. By the time dawn broke, Hannah had made her decision. Jack was already in the kitchen when Hannah emerged from her room, Thomas gurgling happily in his cradle nearby as his father prepared breakfast. "Good morning," Jack said, his smile slightly hesitant. "I hope you slept well." Hannah nodded, moving to lift Thomas from his cradle. The baby cooed, reaching for her face with tiny fingers. "I did eventually," she said, pressing a kiss to Thomas's forehead. "I've been thinking about what you said." Jack set down the spoon he'd been using to stir the oatmeal, his full attention on Hannah. "And I'd like to stay," Hannah said simply. "Not with any promises about the future, but I'd like to see where this might lead, for all of us." The joy that bloomed across Jack's face was answer enough. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and, mindful of Thomas between them, gently cupped Hannah's face in his hands. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hannah nodded, her heart racing as Jack leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, then warm and sure. It was nothing like the clumsy attempts from boys in her youth, or the entitled advances of the men who had proposed to her. Jack's kiss held respect and tenderness, and something that felt remarkably like coming home. When they broke apart, Thomas was batting at Jack's arm as if demanding to be included in this new arrangement. Both adults laughed, the tension dissolving into something lighter, full of possibility. "I'll need to return to my ranch today," Hannah said, "to collect more of my things and make arrangements." "Of course," Jack agreed. "Take Pete with you, he can help with anything heavy." And so it was that Hannah found herself riding back toward her homestead with Jack's foreman, her mind whirling with the sudden change in her circumstances. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been a solitary woman with no prospects beyond her next cattle sale. Now she was. What exactly? Not quite a wife, not simply a housekeeper, but something in between, a woman with a chance at a family of her own. Hannah's small ranch looked exactly as she had left it. though she noticed Pete's men had kept the yard tidy and the animals well tended. Inside her cabin, however, everything felt different. The rooms seemed smaller somehow, the silence oppressive rather than peaceful. "I'll wait outside while you gather your things, Miss Ainsley," Pete said respectfully. Hannah nodded her thanks and moved through the cabin. Collecting clothing, personal items, and the few mementos of her parents, she cherished her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, the family Bible with its record of births and deaths. As she packed, Hannah found herself wondering what her father would think of her decision. Abel Ainsley had been a practical man, not given to romantic notions, but he had loved her mother deeply and had never fully recovered from her loss. He would want Hannah to be happy, she decided. He would approve of a man like Jack, hardworking, honest, devoted to his child. It took most of the day to arrange everything to Hannah's satisfaction. She spoke with her nearest neighbors, the Thompsons, who agreed to check on the property regularly. She wrote a letter to her father's lawyer in town, explaining her temporary relocation and instructing him to forward any important correspondence to Jack's ranch. And she carefully locked up the cabin, taking one last look around before mounting her horse for the ride back to what would now be her home, at least for a time. Jack was waiting on the porch when they returned, Thomas in his arms. The baby was dressed in a clean gown, and Jack himself looked freshly shaved, his usually work-worn appearance softened for her return. "Welcome back," he said as Hannah dismounted, and the simple words carried a weight of meaning that made her smile. "It's good to be back," she replied, and found that she meant it completely. Summer bloomed across the Montana landscape, turning the hills a vibrant green and filling the valley with wildflowers. Hannah settled into life at the Whitaker Ranch with surprising ease, her days filled with caring for Thomas, maintaining the house, and gradually taking on more responsibilities with the cattle operation. Jack had not exaggerated when he said they could work both properties together. He valued Hannah's knowledge of ranching and often sought her advice on matters his own father had handled before his passing. Thomas thrived under their care, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. He began to roll over, then sit up, his personality emerging in chortles of laughter and occasional stubborn protests that reminded Hannah of his father. "He's got your determination," she told Jack one evening as they sat on a blanket near the creek, watching Thomas bat at a colorful toy Hannah had sewn for him. "And your patience," Jack countered, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind Hannah's ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. "Most of the time, anyway." Hannah laughed, leaning into his touch. The initial hesitancy between them had gradually given way to a comfortable affection, with Jack's respectful courtship progressing at a pace that honored both Aliner's memory and the newness of their relationship. They had shared more kisses, each more confident than the last, and Hannah had grown accustomed to the way Jack would reach for her hand when they walked together, or the brush of his arm against hers as they worked side by side. Yet they maintained separate bedrooms, a boundary Jack had established out of respect for Hannah's reputation and his own sense of propriety. Silver Creek might be miles away, but news traveled, and Jack was determined that no breath of scandal would touch Hannah or affect Thomas's future standing in the community. As summer waned toward autumn, however, Hannah found herself wondering about the future. Jack had not mentioned marriage since that first conversation on the porch, and while she understood his caution, a small part of her wondered if perhaps he had changed his mind about his initial intentions. The matter came to a head on an unusually warm September evening. Thomas had been put to bed, and Hannah and Jack had retreated to the porch with glasses of lemonade, as had become their custom. The conversation had turned to winter preparations for the cattle when Jack suddenly set down his glass and turned to face Hannah directly. "I received a letter from the circuit preacher today," he said. "He'll be coming through Silver Creek next month." Hannah nodded, unsure why Jack seemed so intent. "It will be good to have Thomas properly christened." "Yes," Jack agreed, but that's not the only reason I'm mentioning it." He took a deep breath. "Hannah, these past months have been the happiest I've known since losing Alina. You've brought life back into this house and joy back into Thomas's world and mine." Hannah felt her pulse quicken as Jack reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I meant what I said about needing you, but now I know it's more than that. I love you, Hannah Ainsley, not as a replacement for what I've lost, but as the beginning of something new." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes as she looked from the ring to Jack's hopeful face. "Are you certain?" she asked softly. "It's been less than 6 months." Jack took her hand in his. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "I love you, Hannah, and Thomas loves you. We want to be a family in truth, not just in practice." Hannah smiled through her tears. "Then yes, Jack Whittaker, yes, I will marry you." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate. A testament to the love that had grown between them through quiet moments of shared purpose and mutual respect. The wedding took place on a crisp October afternoon, with the aspens turning gold along the hillsides and the first hint of winter in the air. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the Silver Creek Church with just a handful of neighbors and friends in attendance. Pete stood as Jack's best man, while Hannah had asked Mrs. Thompson to stand up with her. Thomas, now nearly 8 months old, was held by Pete's wife during the ceremony, his blue eyes wide as he watched his father and the woman who had become his mother in all but name join hands before the preacher. "I, Jack William Whittaker, take thee, Hannah Abigail Ainsley, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Jack recited, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Hannah repeated the vows, her heart full as she looked into Jack's eyes, seeing there not just the man he was but the life they would build together. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was both reverent and possessive, acclaiming that Hannah returned with equal fervor. The small reception that followed was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hung from tree branches to illuminate the celebration as dusk fell. There was music from a fiddle and harmonica, played by 2 of Jack's ranch hands, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As Hannah stood watching the festivities, Thomas sleeping soundly against her shoulder, Jack came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy, Mrs. Whittaker?" he asked, the new name still sounding novel and wonderful to Hannah's ears. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I think our son has had quite enough excitement for one day." Jack's face softened at the word hour, his hand coming up to stroke Thomas's dark hair. "Our son," he echoed. "That sounds right, doesn't it?" Hannah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "It does." Later, after the guests had departed, and Thomas had been settled in his cradle, moved for the first time into what would become a proper nursery rather than Jack's bedroom, Hannah stood in the master bedroom, suddenly shy as Jack closed the door behind them. "Nervous?" he asked gently, coming to stand before her. Hannah looked up at her husband, and shook her head. "Not nervous exactly, just, this is new." Jack took her hands in his, lifting each one to his lips for a kiss. "We have all the time in the world, Hannah, there's no rush." But as his lips found hers, Hannah found that she didn't want to wait, didn't want to hesitate at this final threshold. She had chosen this man, this life, with clear eyes and an open heart. Now she wanted to embrace every aspect of being Jack Whittaker's wife. Their coming together was tender and unhurried, Jack's reverence for her body matched by Hannah's discovery of the pleasure to be found in his. When they finally lay spent in each other's arms, the moonlight casting silver patterns across the bed covers, Hannah felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Jack asked, brushing them away with gentle fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy," Hannah admitted. I had resigned myself to a life alone. Jack gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You'll never be alone again, he promised. Not as long as I have breath in my body. As the seasons turned, Hannah and Jack settled into the rhythms of married life with a harmony that seemed to confirm they had been meant for one another all along. The combined ranching operation flourished under their joint management, with Hannah's careful bookkeeping complementing Jack's skill with the cattle and horses. They hired additional hands to manage the increased workload, and by the following spring, talks had begun about expanding their herd further. Thomas grew from infant to toddler, taking his first steps in the kitchen with both parents cheering him on. He called Hannah Mama without hesitation, the word filling her heart each time she heard it. If he sometimes asked questions about the pretty lady in the picture on his dresser, Alina, whose memory Jack kept alive through stories and small remembrances, Hannah answered with honesty and love, never feeling threatened by the place Jack's first wife held in their family history. It was early summer, nearly a year after Hannah had first heard a baby's cry during a thunderstorm, when she realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be certain, then shared the news with Jack one evening after Thomas had been tucked into bed. A baby. Jack repeated, his expression transforming from surprise to joy in an instant. We're having a baby, Hannah nodded, her hands instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. If my calculations are correct, sometime in early winter. Jack lifted her into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of delight that nearly woke Thomas. Hannah, this is wonderful news. You're happy then? Hannah asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Ecstatic, Jack confirmed, setting her down gently and dropping to his knees to place a reverent kiss on her abdomen. Another child to love, a brother or sister for Thomas. As her pregnancy progressed, Hannah found herself reflecting often on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this point. If she hadn't woken to the sound of Thomas crying that stormy night, if she hadn't gone to investigate, if she hadn't said those fateful words to Jack, he needs a soft voice and steady hands, how different her life might be now. The baby, a girl they named Alina Rose after both Jack's first wife and Hannah's mother, was born on a snowy December night with the assistance of the doctor from Silver Creek and Mrs. Thompson, who had become a dear friend to Hannah. Jack paced outside the bedroom until the first cry rent the air, then rushed in to find Hannah holding their daughter, exhausted but radiant. She's perfect, Jack whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and reaching out to touch the downy head with trembling fingers. She is, Hannah agreed, shifting the baby so Jack could take her. Jack cradled his daughter with the practiced ease of a father, though his eyes held the wonder of first-time parenthood. Hello, little Alina, he murmured. Welcome to the family. 2-year-old Thomas, brought in to meet his sister the next morning, regarded the baby with solemn curiosity before declaring her tiny and asking if she could play with his wooden horse. The adults laughed, and Hannah felt her heart might burst with the fullness of her joy. As winter gave way to spring once more, the Whittaker household settled into new rhythms. Thomas became a protective older brother, proudly helping with the baby whenever allowed. Jack managed the increasing demands of the ranch while ensuring he was present for family dinners and bedtime stories. And Hannah balanced motherhood and ranching with a confidence that grew with each passing day. One clear May evening, Hannah stood on the porch, Alina sleeping against her chest while Thomas and Jack examined a bird's nest they had discovered in the barn earlier that day. The setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light, and Hannah was struck by the simple perfection of the moment. Jack looked up, catching her eye, and smiled that special smile that even after nearly 2 years still made Hannah's heart skip a beat. He whispered something to Thomas, who nodded solemnly, and then both Whittaker males approached the porch with suspiciously innocent expressions. "What are you two plotting?" Hannah asked, arching an eyebrow. Thomas giggled and thrust forward a small, slightly crushed bouquet of wildflowers. "For you, Mama," "Thank you, sweetheart," Hannah said, bending carefully to accept the offering without disturbing Alina. "They're beautiful." "Thomas thought you might like some flowers," Jack explained, coming to stand beside her, "and I thought you might like a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Hannah asked. Jack's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. "Of how grateful I am that you found us that night, that you knew exactly what Thomas needed." "A soft voice and steady hands," Hannah recalled softly. "Yes," Jack agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But what he really needed, what we both needed, was you." Thomas tugged at Hannah's skirt. "Can we have cookies now?" The adults laughed, the moment of sentimentality broken by childish practicality. "Yes, we can have cookies," Hannah agreed. "Your father might even let you have two if you wash your hands properly." As they moved inside together, Jack lifting Thomas onto his shoulders, Hannah cradling Alina, Hannah felt the rightness of their family, pieced together by circumstance and choice, by chance and by love. From the desperate cry of a baby in a storm to this moment of domestic contentment, their journey had been one of healing and hope. And as Jack caught her eye across the kitchen, his gaze filled with a love that continued to deepen with each passing day, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not in solitude on her father's ranch, but here, in the heart of a family that had been waiting for her all along.